let me go pass these out.
Still some don't say people, there's others calling me. He's driving back through the cattle in a big long limousine. Doing 70 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour zone. He won't give a damn about our laws, even making up his own. Well, the air up here in Oregon, it's clear as it can be. Where a man can do what he wants to do and he can be what he wants to be. We've got our laws and standards, it seems just a little bit funny. And a man can change them laws around just because he got a lot of money, money. Hey, guru, ain't nobody what you gonna do? Guru, so the whole damn guy's picking on you.
That song was Guru Guru, sung by the Lee Anderson Band. I think they were from Duper, from southern Wasco County anyway. And these four fine people were in it. I actually know Joe Shabel. His name's spelled wrong in the poster there, but this is from April 1982, so people were already beginning to think about what's going on here. Work closer. Any closer? Okay. So the clipboards are being passed around, and I'll do my very best to contact anyone that you can write down and give me enough information that I can actually get hold of them. So the Rajneesh cult was located in southern Wasco County between 1981 and 1985. The focus of my talk today, though, will not be on the cult or its followers per se, although I need to give you some background. But what I'm really interested in is how our local people were affected by the events that happened. There's so many interesting stories out there and so many people who were involved. I just know I'm going to be able to get some more really good interviews. And the whole purpose of this project is to collect the information. Granted, it's not fresh, it's recollections of what happened, but sometimes that can distill things down pretty well. And then to have them available for researchers who want to find out more. So this won't be proprietary, and I hope to be able to write a book from it and then get it out into the public. Okay. So in 1981, Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, that's who he is, was an Indian guru with a commune in Pune, India, with a large international following. The commune was under investigation in India for tax fraud and for other irregularities, tax evasion, immigration fraud. And the Bhagwan's personal secretary, Sheila Patel, known as Ma Anand Sheila, she attended college in the United States. So she arranged for Bhagwan to come to the U.S. on a temporary visa, on a medical visa, because he had a bad back, or so saying that. So here's Sheila. She was the spokesperson for the Bhagwan, and in the beginning she seemed really open and friendly and invited everybody to come out to the ranch to see what was going on. But as the Rajneeshis were repeatedly checked in their attempts to act without regulation, Sheila got actually kind of vicious and accusatory in news interviews and in meetings, and she said bad words and she made bad signs with her hands, and she got pretty well known. But this is the countryside down by the Muddy Ranch where the Bhagwan eventually settled. The numbers of people who were living on the ranch began to increase dramatically and kind of secretly. And so did the building construction, which often proceeded without proper permitting from the Wasco County Planning Department. So more about that and about Planning Director Dan Bureau and his tribulations a little bit later. He's here listening, so he can correct me if I make mistakes. So this is the evil Sheila. The bad Sheila. She just looks like she can cause trouble. Okay, the Sannyasins were mostly wealthy and well-educated. They were expected to give their wealth to the Bhagwan in exchange for enlightenment, for the chance to be near to him. On the ranch, they mostly did work that wasn't in line with their formal qualifications. They all participated in building facilities and working on the farm and operating heavy equipment if they were able. There were a few individuals, mostly lawyers and physicians, who worked in their own fields to forward the cult, to forward the commune's interests. So this is an interesting thing. It's an overlay map from the fall of 1982, and it's what was there and the overlay. I don't know if you can see. I guess you can kind of see that. That's where the buildings were planned to be. Just kind of a check on it. The Rajneeshis wanted to incorporate on their land a 2,000-acre city of Rajneeshpuram. But when they couldn't, and then they found out that they couldn't do it because the land was zoned for exclusive farm use. And Dan, I'm going to be simplifying this down to the nub, so you just have to forgive me. There's just so much going back and forth between things. So the first effort that they made was to take over the city of Antelope, which is about 18 miles or so from the ranch. Margaret Hill was the mayor of Antelope at the time of the takeover, and Keith Moley was the city attorney, and I'll be talking about them a little bit later too. Then the Wasco County Court voted to approve the Rajneeshis' petition for an incorporation election. That was kind of a surprise to some of it. And of course, the voters on the ranch approved the incorporation of Rajneeshpuram 154-0 in an election that was held May 18th, 1982. So now incorporation gave the city, rather than the county, the right to decide how to use property within the city limits. And they went forward at full speed. But the Land Use Board of Appeals, LUBA, ruled in September '83 that Rajneeshpuram's incorporation was invalid because the county officials hadn't properly considered the effects of siting an urban center in that area. So arguments went back and forth between LUBA and the Court of Appeals, with the group 1,000 Friends of Oregon always weighing in. Attorney General Dave Frohnmeyer issued an opinion about a year later that the city was having a city like that violated the separation of church and state. Initially, the Rajneeshis would come in saying, we're not a religion, but then they were very heavily stating in their paper and otherwise, they had a newspaper they published, that they were a religious group. So that was a pretty tough place for them to be in. But you can see how the city got all built up, and this is probably pretty far along. There were some international world festivals that were held there for 3 years. Whoops, how did I get there? That's the very end of it. Am I going backwards all the time?
No, I think you did hit. Instead of page down, you hit a page to the end.
You're seeing all my pictures. Did you have to get straightened out here? I'm sorry. Now we're back to the beginning. I can use this if you show me which one. Stop the camera.
Push the down button.
I'm just down. Okay. I was trying to do the other stuff. Down here. Okay, so here we are going through Bad Sheila and construction, and there's the building. So at this point, the cult leaders decided that the best way to move forward was to gain control of the Wasco County Court through manipulating the elections in Wasco County government. So County Clerk Sue Prophet, Karen Levette Coates, and Linda Brown were all involved in countering these efforts. This is a pillar that's on the ranch. It says, I go to the feet of the awakened one, I go to the feet of the commune of the awakened one, I go to the feet of the, there it says, ultimate truth of the awakened one. This is all about Bhagwan. In order to have an influence on the elections, the Rajneeshis were going to take two tacks, and one of them was going to be to increase the number of eligible voters who would vote the way they wanted them to, and the other attack was going to be to reduce the number of eligible voters who would vote the other way against them. So in order to increase the number of voters, they conceived of this Share a Home program, which brought in thousands, several thousands of homeless people, mostly men, from across the United States, from as far away as New York. They were promised a place to stay and food and beer and clothes, and you know what color the clothes were going to be, and in exchange for registering to vote. Secretary of State Norma Paulus, in consultation with our county clerks group, stopped the registration, the voter registration in Wasco County. At that time, registration was same day, so you could just come in and register to vote and then vote. So it wasn't very long after the voter registration was stopped that all these homeless people were turned back out onto the street, and they were appearing in the Dalles and Madras without any money, any place to go. I even heard that one man ended up on the mountain and died. It was cold, frozen. So they were all trying to get back to their original, I was going to say homes, but if they were homeless, but at least their cities of origin. And the Salvation Army was very good in helping them do that. And in Portland, in order to raise money for these people, some disc jockeys made a parody version of Tommy Gray's 1962 classic, Sheila. We're just going to play a little bit of it.
Okay, this is the casino.
Okay, yeah, this is a casino on the ranch, so they just really went to town out there. They had all kinds of sophisticated things.
Sweet little Sheila, mama not Sheila, you're the bag one's right-hand gal. Big mouth Sheila, mama not Sheila, you should take the silence vow. Shut up Sheila, on the news we see ya, saying words you should not say. She's a red disaster, that is why we ask her to dry up and blow away. Me and Sheila go on a ride, feeling funny inside. Then little Sheila screams in my ear, ow, 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 ow. Shut up Sheila dear, Sheila says she feels me, she says she never leave me, but the bus won't come around. I'm so doggone angry, stuck in Wasco County, man, this little girl is loud.
I always meditated 110 decibels.
Shut up, Sheila!
It's American Drive to carry megaphone.
Shut up, Sheila!
Freedom of speech includes volume.
Mother Sheila!
I'm qualified in public relations.
Shut up, Sheila!
Mine is worth more time as I am.
She was really a character. And I understand that a chameleon, she could change her demeanor and pretty much her appearance to take on whatever role she needed to at the time. So the other side of the plan, of course, was to reduce the number of eligible voters who weren't sympathetic to the Rajneeshis. And to this end, the Rajneeshis obtained Salmonella trimurtium, Salmonella typhimurium, from a lab in Seattle. And they'd experimented with ways to sicken the population in the Dalles and reduce the number of people who'd be able to get to the polls to vote. They wanted to reduce that. So the salad bar poisonings that you've all heard about happened in September and October of 1984. And I'll return to this series of events a little bit later. This is one of the Rajneeshi Peace Force guys. After Rajneesh Puram became a city, I think that made it eligible to obtain training from the state police. So they were able to get some training, and they were pretty hardcore. As more and more unneighborly, illegal, and even criminal things came to light, the tide of feeling began to turn against the commune, and so the Rajneeshis ramped their peace force up, and they were even doing target practice with human forms. So a lot of people wondered if at some point there was going to be some violence between the Rajneeshis who had guns and checkpoints along the county road and everything, and the locals, a lot of whom carried guns in their trucks anyway. I mean, it was kind of a tinderbox feeling, but thankfully nothing ever happened. So now I'm going to change focus a little bit and tell you about when I went out there on a tour. So here, this is quintessential, but I'm not asking you to tell me about anymore. This is my dad standing on the right, and some friends from Sherman County. I think my mom's wanting the pictures. But they toured the Rajneesh Puram twice. The first time was in September of '82, and they were free to wander around and ask questions, and everybody was really friendly and explained what was going on. And the second time, when I went with them 9 months later, it was a lot different. I was really offended that they couldn't drive on a county road. I mean, that they would be able to stop you and ask you where you were planning to go. I never got a good answer on that. When I interviewed in Sherman County, I interviewed Jerry Lowry, who was sheriff, and Brad Lowry's the sheriff now. And he said he didn't really know how that could happen either. So I haven't got a good answer to how they could have done that. We at this time when my parents went out, we had to take a bus tour. We couldn't just wander around. There was a hostess on the bus, and she was called Twinkie. Hostess Twinkies, I mean, really quite weird. But the atmosphere was still upbeat and very cordial towards visitors. When we were there, we saw a drive-by, and it wasn't this one. This is a fancy one with petals in the air and all that. People adoring Bhagwan. And this is a quintessential picture. I had to show you this. It was taken by a person named Greg Paul. I know that. I mean, it appears everywhere without attribution, but Will Finney identified it, and so I know that that's it. But those people were just in ecstasy. So this is actually what my parents and I saw. It was very, very hot. It was the middle of June. It was dusty. All those people were standing there lined clear up down the road and waiting for Bhagwan to drive by. So it wasn't quite as always as joyful and special as it looked like it was that first time. Well, I started working for the post office in the Dalles in 1984, so several years after they'd been established at Rajneesh Puram. And I'd seen the Rajneeshis around town in their red, purple, orange clothing. And they didn't seem like a bad thing for the area. They were spending money, they were buying construction materials, and at least early in the game they were paying their bills. And they didn't seem to be bothering anybody, and so I didn't see what the harm was. But there were some things that went on. Oops, I'm going backwards again. I'm going to be telling you about the town of Antelope, the takeover, the renaming as Rajneesh, and then how it got back to Antelope, pretty briefly. So this is a newspaper clipping, not a great photograph, but down at the bottom, I think I got this down at the U of O in the archives. It says something about what's so great about this ghost town or something like that, what could go on out here. You know, people live there, and they've lived there a long time, and it's really crummy when somebody comes in and tries to take you over. My neighbor in the Dalles was Cecilia Cushing, who grew up in Duffer. And I think she and Bill Hulse actually went to grade school together or something like that. But she had a different point of view about what was going on. Her nephew, Bill Driver from Wamick, had noticed what was happening, and he was really unhappy with how the Antelope townspeople were being treated. He had some serious concerns about the true nature of what the Rajneeshis were up to, and he'd been harassed himself by the Peace Force and others. So he approached Will Finney, who was the editor of the Dalles Weekly Reminder, to help him document what was going on, these disquieting activities in Antelope and elsewhere. Here's a photo of Keith Mobley. Keith had been acting as the pro bono Antelope city attorney, and because his parents lived in Antelope, he'd always also been helping out with things like the water system, which was giving them a lot of problems. He found himself drawn into the Rajneeshi situation, whether or not he wanted to be. There were, besides the takeover of Antelope, there was also the issue of the Rajneeshis trying to take over the Episcopal Church there and make a community center out of it. And also the problem of figuring out how to fund schools when the Rajneeshis wanted to have their own system and the local kids, it just was a really bad match, and the local kids ended up getting bused to Madras for school. So there were things going on. And so I'm going to show you a picture of the young Keith. And since he's here, he can tell me, was this during this incorporation election? Is that why you're being interviewed there?
I think it was.
Okay. Yeah. So in April of 1982, Sheila instructed about 60 Rajneeshis to move to Antelope, which had a population of in the mid-40s, 47 or something, so that the cult could gain control of the city council. The city, seeing what was going to happen, tried to disincorporate in advance of this in May to avoid being taken over, but they were outvoted in the November election and the attempt failed. So Antelope was renamed Rajneesh, and that's separate from Rajneesh Param, which was the larger city miles away. And the new city council started approving the variances they needed for property that was in the city limits. This is Margaret Hill. Margaret is a former teacher, and she was the current mayor of Antelope when the takeover effort started. As the mayor, she ran city council meetings, and the Rajneeshis started to attend and started to hijack the agenda. So Margaret got some advice and was told to start being more firm, to set timelines, and she said in her interview that Krishna Deva, who was one of the people from one of the Rajneeshis, would show up just minutes before the deadline with a foot-high stack of papers. And one day he was wanting her to agree that it would be a good thing for Antelope to let Rajneesh Param get incorporated, that this would take the pressure off of Antelope. And Margaret said, well, maybe it would, but she had a reservation. She didn't think it would be legal. But Katie said, well, send a note to Sheila saying that. She would like to have a note from you. So Margaret sent the requested note, and now I'm going to play you a little portion from Margaret's interview so you can hear what happened. Margaret's just this wonderful, genuine, gracious woman. She has really steady nerves and a great sense of humor. So help you, Roger.
Okay.
Which of the Rajneeshis could you identify individual people?
I knew Dave Knapp, who was called Krishna Deva.
David Knapp.
He was just kind of a set-off there. He was in charge of anything that went on in Antelope. He was the one who brought out things of the council meetings and that sort of thing. And later on, when they applied for the city up there, he came and he talked to me all afternoon about how much it was the pressure to take off Antelope, which was probably true. So I finally really Reynolds note, and I said something to the effect that it might take the pressure off Antelope if the Rajneesh had their own city out there. But I thought it would, I let Wayne be small. He was back at my board the next day, and he came in, and he was really upset. Sheila and I came up. Sheila was upset, and I said, shoot, she was always upset. There were 3 things he told me. One was a liar, not the other thing. And I said, well, my goodness. And he plumped himself down on the end of the sofa, away from the desk, and he looked up, I looked at the teacher, and that my longer for a while. And finally I said, are we playing games or what? And then he dropped his eyes, but I think he was trying to, But, so I think it was trying to bring the dust and I think
Isn't that interesting? There were other reports of that kind of behavior of the Rajneesh just staring at somebody for time. It was definitely an intimidation move. So eventually, well, more happened. This is a protest in front of the Antelope Cafe, now named Zorba Buddha restaurant. But Antelope did regain its name, and the town of Rajneesh faded into history. But a lot of damage had been done to the social structure of the town. Some people had sold their places to the Rajneeshis. It was just too much pressure and too unpleasant, and had left. And had moved, and their neighbors felt abandoned. So it was kind of a sad situation for a town that hadn't really been there for a long time, a pretty stable set of people. So this is a protest march, and there's a Peace Force car there with an officer in it. I'm not sure about these, but I think they must be about antelope. Is that right? Does that look like antelope to you?
Right side is Will Post.
Will Carey?
I'm sorry, Will Carey.
Will Carey. Oh, Bill Holmes. Okay, there you go. Thank you, because I didn't recognize him that way. Okay, and Will Carey, a lawyer to the right.
He was assessor, city attorney for Antelope. He took over when I
After
went to
you.
Yes.
You persuaded him.
Yes, he volunteered after.
With his arm.
Is that right? The door to Bill Holtz, the county judge's office, that they had to just close. Remember when they closed off that door?
Is this in our in the
Courthouse
courthouse?
might be at the end of that hall.
Okay, so it might be in the Dells. Okay. So these were some photos that Will Finney had from the weekly reminder. They weren't identified, so I kind of just put them in here, and thank you. That's what I was hoping would happen, is to find out some of these. So I think the person sitting down at the table is Fred Krause, who was the superintendent of anybody else in there that you, well, Sheila in front.
That's David Knapp.
David Knapp standing up there.
No, that's Wadu.
Is that what you?
That's one, oh.
Okay. I get them mixed up too. I have to see them full on to recognize them. So here's the Antelope Cafe post Zorba the Buddha, and I'm guessing that because of the ATM sign there in the front. That's probably more modern. And here's a photo I found on the web that shows the people celebrating that they're now back to Antelope and not with Rajneeshis anymore. And if you've been around the Dalles, you know that there, at the courthouse, there's a statue of an antelope, a bronze statue, and this is the legend at the bottom. You could probably read it better than I up there, so I'll let you do that. So what I've had to do is not talk about everybody who gave me wonderful interviews. I'm having to kind of chunk it. So I picked the antelope takeover as the part that I could let you hear about. And now I'm going to talk about some of the things that happened with the Wasco County Planning Department. And then finally I'll talk about the salmonella poisoning and the various kind of stages of that. As county planning director, Dan Durow had to make many trips out to Rajneesh Puram to make sure that the buildings were being constructed properly and being used for their stated purpose. In this recording, it's going to be about 5 minutes long, but Dan speaks up, so you'll be able to hear him. He tells about one of the scary times he had at the ranch and how glad he was to see Jeannie Sr., who was a writer for the Oregonian at the time and a local person. She's from Hood River. So she came out to meet him. There it is.
I had to go to the ranch pretty regularly after it was determined by the courts that the incorporation may be overturned. The courts gave jurisdiction back to Wasco County. Because of that court ruling, they were just mad as could be, and angry. Always had to go around with the sheriff's deputy. They now wore a bullet-proof vest. My senior planner at the time, Jim Johnson, and I went with Deputy Davison. And we had been gone for a couple of hours when Gene Senior called. My secretary said to her that we had left and we were down to the ranch. Jeannie got in the car and drove down right away. When she got there, they just denied that I was even there right there. Well, in the meantime, we arrived and we had to drive all the way down where they had a truck farming operation, and there were some new buildings that were built, and we wanted to verify that they were actual farm buildings. 2 cars followed us, and we drove straight down to that farming operation. You know, we just didn't want to be loitering around there all day because of the way they treated us when we were down there. They would use profanities and call me names and scream in my face. And so we got down there, saw what we wanted to see, and turned around. And as we pulled out, they spun their wheels, and gravel was flying so that they got ahead of us on the way out. And as we pulled up out of that truck farm, they stopped at a garbage station, and we couldn't get by. What they were doing, we found out later, was delaying us long enough so that they could set up this fake accident in the road ahead. Finally, they drove off, and we were right behind them. So we went up over a couple of hills, and sure enough, we come to this tractor with a big wagon crossways in the road at a point where there were deep ditches on both sides, and we couldn't get around it. It was in a deep canyon. 1 or 2 people were standing there who had actually done this. It was more than one person or several to do it, operate it. And so they said, oh, well, we'll get it cleared. And this was before cell phones and the sheriff's radio, because we were down in this canyon, didn't work. Time went by, 1 hour and then another hour. The Rajneeshis who were in the street people, with the Rajneeshis who were working the truck farm, walked by us and got in a bus that came to pick them up on the other side. And we realized at some point that we were the only 3 people to be seen. We were set up again. When everybody disappeared, we really began to get concerned. Fortunately, the sheriff's deputy had a gun with him, but it got to be kind of spooky. We thought about what we should do. Should we all walk out? Well, then we didn't have the protection of the vehicle, and it was a long walk from there. And then it was all through enemy territory, so we didn't think that was a very good idea. And we thought, well, should one of us walk out? Or should 2 of us and one stay with the car? Or we just didn't come up with a good plan. And we couldn't see how we could possibly get around this thing. And the sun was getting lower and starting to get a little darker. And it was just about that time that I think it was a Rajneesh who drove up, or several in a car from the ranch side. And behind them, this other car with Gene Senior in it. After denying for quite a long time that I was even at the ranch, they finally said to her, "My golly, he is here." And so she immediately jumped in the car. She was obviously very concerned. And then made us all think about what it is they had planned that day. Had she not called the office and then decided to drive out there, I had no idea what they had planned. It wouldn't have taken much for the Rajneeshis to figure out one of these street people who may be a little bit unbalanced, and say, we'll give you that gun and go shoot these people, and by the way, here's $5,000 or something. We'll make sure you get away. It wouldn't have taken much to have that happen.
So just hearing that in isolation these days, it sounds kind of extreme. Sorry, Dan. But he wasn't being overly suspicious about his safety because he'd already had to send his 2 young children away. There had been threats. Someone on the phone had said, "We know where your kids go to school." So they were out of town, and he later found out that he was one of 9 people who was on a hit list. And there was a definite plan to kill each of these people systematically, and an attempt was actually made on one of them that failed, Charles Turner. So Jim Comini was also, who was county, on the county court, was also on this hit list, as was Les Seitz, the reporter for the Oregonian, who'd been following the story very closely. So, and as well, on January the 14th in 1985, in the middle of the night, the Wasco County Planning Office was set on fire by the Rajneeshis in hopes of destroying the documents so that they could, that their case would be helped. But they did such a bad job of it that there was a lot more smoke damage than actual fire damage, and a lot of the records were able to be recovered. An interesting, they had so much cheek that they filed a lawsuit then asking the state to take away the right of the Wasco County Planning Office to hold public records because they were incapable of doing it, of caring for the public records. And they also, so here's the building with something like $70,000 worth of damage. They formed a construction company and bid on the building repairs. Isn't that amazing? They didn't have their own bid, unfortunately, but so this is a planning meeting. Definitely, there's Dan in the front, and Wadud and KD. Okay, and this is the next slide is the same meeting from a different angle. Whoops, I'm sorry. So there on the right is Dan and Ernie Keller and Barbara Bailey. And is that at the courthouse in the Dalles?
Yes.
Now I'm going to tell you a bit about the Salmonella hypomurium poisoning. If I can get myself pulled together. All right, there's Bill Halls. To start out with, on August 29th in 1984, all 3 members of the Wasco County Court were at Antelope and at the ranch. The weather was very hot, and there were some things that went on, like flat tires, and all 3 of them were given glasses of water to drink. It was poured out of the same pitcher. Both Bill Hulse and Ray Matthew became ill, but Virgil Ellett did not. And he was seen as a bit more friendly to the Rajneeshis, according to Bill Hulse. And so now I'm going to let you hear what Bill has to say, please, because I don't see where it is on this. Okay, keep looking for it. I knew there was a reason to bring the actual transcripts.
Okay, for some reason we moved on to that one.
We were experimenting with hooking sound onto the PowerPoint slides. So Bill Hulse said, in the meantime, of course, here they wondered if you wanted a drink of water. Well, it was hot, so we all had a drink of water. And they came with 3 glasses on a tray and a pitcher of water. And they poured their water and they handed us the glasses. And Virg Ellett never did get a shot of salmonella or whatever. Ray got one, and I got one. Well, I'd gotten one at the cafe. So I had 2 shots of it. And when we left there, Ray had his car in Antelope, and he was going on. He had a cabin up at Camp Sherman. He was going on up there for the night. But he wasn't so bad. And Ray got a little sick in the night, but not bad. He only had 1 shot of it, and neither one of us had any contact with each other until it was all over. So we all 3 drank at the little cafe. We all 3 drank down at the ranch, but Virg never got any shot. And it was poured from the same pitcher. So it had to have been on the glass. Because they handed us the glasses. And I said, so they knew who was getting which glass, and he said, yeah. That was very, very particular stuff. Eventually, the Rajneeshis decided to contaminate salad bars in the restaurants in the Dalles. And this took place in several waves beginning, it was between September 9th and October 10th of 1984. And there were 10 restaurants that seemed to be most associated with the outbreak. And ultimately, 751 people were known to have been infected with that, and who knows how many more who didn't react so strongly or get so sick. Dr. Tom Hodge remembers treating people at the hospital who were located in the halls because there weren't enough rooms. And this is a picture of Salmonella typhimurium. Marilyn Gladwell, who owned AO Northwest Labs, was shocked to have all these stool samples start coming in that she had to check on, and she was required to report to the state if it reached a certain level of some substances like this. And she also feared that she might personally be at risk for attack because where the lab was located was kind of dark and she had to come out and go to her car, and she felt like she might be at risk. So there was a real concern here that these were bad people. Also, looking back, Cal McDermott remembered a couple of Rajneeshis who came into his restaurant, French house here in the Dalles. They looked around and said, "We can't do anything here." And at the time, he didn't know what was going on. And he thought, they remembered the comment because it wasn't like, "Oh, there's not enough room," or "we can't see," or something like that. It was, "We can't do anything here." And he remembered that because it was a strange thing to say. The French house didn't have a salad bar, so they were spared that. And here's the postcard I wrote to my friend Susan Mallory. "Dear Susan, I'm sorry you missed the meeting. Mike Craig said you were ill. I hope it's not salmonella." She saved this and sent it to me just a couple of years ago. This is in California now, anyway. So she was eating at a restaurant, which I won't name, with her husband Gordon, and she had salad, he had pizza, and at one point he reached over for a piece of her lettuce and she said, "You got your own food, right?" So he didn't get sick, but she did. And also, Ernie Keller told me in his interview that he kind of figured something weird was going on, and a lot of sports teams traveling through high school sports and stuff would stop in the Dalles for meals, and he said he called a few of them and told them maybe they should just go on by until he figured out what was going on. And I have to say, the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, came in to investigate this. They did an epidemiological investigation. But the report wasn't published until 13 years later. 13 in 1997, because there would be a copycat crime. So it's just really weird. So nobody died, but a number of people ended up with some serious health problems, gastrointestinal things, following the poisoning. And then, again, on another note, there was kind of an undercurrent of nervous jokes and outright gags that demonstrated how worried people were about the Rajneeshis. And so I'm going to show you a few of the kind of goofy things that I came across in my talking to people. Here's a bullseye with the Rajneeshi. It's just on a particle board, it's just somebody's gag joke. You might have seen some of those around. I'm not supposed to say who it belongs to. And here's a bumper sticker. Better dead than red.
What's with red?
What?
What is with the red?
Oh, those sunset colors were what the Rajneeshis wore. And I tell you, it just ruined people's wardrobes for years after that. They usually just would not wear red. Stan just told me a story about his wife when they came to the Dalles. She was wearing red and people really gave her the eye. So here's the last one. It's bog weenies. And this is something that Will Finney had. And I guess they were made in Gresham, so they must, it's all right there. It looks pretty efficient. It's kind of cool. And here's a mola. So I'll leave that on there while I tell you that I got interested in this whole Rajneesh thing back in 2007 when my mom asked me to take her to the Discovery Center to hear some people talking about the Rajneeshis. And it was Dan Durow, Judy Sr., and Bill Hulse. And I was sitting there thinking, I wish I had a recorder. These stories are amazing. So I decided that I would try to interview as many people as I could, and get these stories so that they won't be forgotten. So my first interview was with Bill Hulse, and I hope I've got to become a better interviewer since then. I don't know, I probably was kind of rough in the beginning, but thank goodness we have editing tools and we can work on digital files, clean it up. And I've also done a couple of group interviews. One of them was with the Sherman County Court, when I was working on an issue of Sherman County for the Record, the Historical Society. So anyway, the end of the story is that on September 13th, it all fell apart at the ranch, 1985. Sheila left. She decamped with 3 of her friends, and 2 days later, Bhagwan, who'd been silent for a number of years, broke his silence and denounced Sheila and said that people didn't have to wear red anymore and that she'd been a real villain, and he tried to make nice with the county and everything. He ordered Antelope's name to be restored, and then on October 27th, he tried to leave the country, but he was apprehended in Charlotte, North Carolina, when his plane stopped to refuel. And I think it was the next day that Sheila and her companions were extradited from West Germany and brought back to the U.S. But the Sannyasins who'd been on the ranch, I'm guessing most of whom had no idea what was going on, were starting to disperse by then because they could see it was all gone, and they didn't have any money left anymore because hopefully their education could help them get their lives back. So what happened? Those who were responsible for the crimes were pretty much brought back to justice. On November 14th, Bhagwan pled guilty to immigration fraud. He got a suspended sentence and was allowed to leave the country. I think he was not in very good health. He was just glad to have him go. And the next July, Sheila was sentenced to 64 years in jail on a variety of charges to be served concurrently with no more than a 20-year maximum sentence. But she only ended up serving 2 years and 5 months in a jail in California, and she was released early for good behavior. But she was also deported. So she actually apparently still owes Wasco County, there was a fine associated with that, she still owes Wasco County for the arson to the planning office. And the other Rajneeshis that were involved were brought to trial. So then what was left was to disperse the contents of the ranch. Is that where it's supposed to be? Probably. Anyway, there they are, the bad guys. Mug shots. And here, Linda LeBreton Coates and Karen LeBreton Coates and Linda Brown on one of the beds out there at Rajneesh Girl. These were among the things that were being got rid of. And I know that there were quite a few people who went out there and saw what they could get. It was for sale. So the land, there were 93 Rolls Royces. You knew that the Bhagwan was in Rolls Royces. And there were 85 left, and those were sold to a dealer in Texas. And then the land eventually was sold to a Christian group, Young Life, and they run a camp out there. Now, Bhagwan died of heart failure in 1990, but his cult continues on. He's known as Osho, and you can find him on the web. There he is. So what happened to Sheila? There she is. She'd married her 4th husband, who was a Swiss national, and today she's in Switzerland. She operates 2 homes for adults with mental disabilities, and she's said to be gentle and caring to her clients. She also wrote a memoir called Don't Kill Him that's recently been translated into English, and I've ordered it for now. I want to see what she has to say. That's pretty weird. So here are Bill and Dan at Young Life in March of 2008. And then that same year in October, I took a trip out with the Wasco County Historical Society and looked around that place. It's really been spiffed up. It's a pretty cool place for kids to be. So the Rajneesh story appeared in People magazine. It was in the New Yorker in a couple of sections. There have been lots of books written by the Sannyasins about their own inner journeys. But the Oregonian has covered this in depth. And if you want to know more about what was going on in the commune, as well as in the community, I recommend OregonLive.com/Rajneesh. And the writer is Les Seitz. He's got a pretty, of all of the reporters, he's got the most comprehensive overview of things. He's kept up on it, and maybe 5 years ago published an update. But really, Jeannie Senior was good, and her husband Thomas Hammerman was good, and Will Finney, he's just got my heart, I guess. He was the one with Bill Driver who really got on the story and published stuff when the Chronicle wouldn't do it. And it's because of him that we know as much as we did early on about what was going on. So Will Finney has lent me his some tapes he had, cassette recordings of the Rajneesh and Antelope City Council meetings. And my dear husband Roger is currently putting them onto CDs. So we've heard some little bits about Jim Foster being out there advocating for the Episcopal Church to not become a community center, and they're being very sarcastic about his appeal and stuff. So there'll be some interesting things that come out of that. So, any questions? Yes?
Yeah, was Rajneesh out of the loop and Sheila doing most of the hench work? Because there's a mixed beliefs on what he was really intending on doing and what Sheila was actually doing.
Right. That's a question I asked in my interview. If people,
Closer to the mic.
okay, sorry. People have very different points of view on that. At first, I was pretty convinced that Sheila was doing what she wanted to do, but the more I read and look into it, the more I think that Bhagwan was under control, had it under control. But he was supposed to have been doing drugs, and I don't know how much under control you can be with that. Also, Sheila had bugged reporters, and that isn't something he was approved of. So I don't really know. Open question. Yes.
I was just going to mention that the public library here in town has one copy of the memoir that you mentioned, of Sheila. And it's currently checked out, but you can put a reserve on it.
Oh, thank you.
If
It wasn't very expensive. It ordered like $5.
Yeah, if anybody's even interested.
Yeah, the library does have a good collection of Rajneeshi books, both those written by the sannyasins and those written by people like Donna Smith about animal. Do you find that were there any people you could suggest for me to interview? There were. Did you have a question?
Yes, I was thinking about what you said when the Peace Patrol was stopping people on a county road and you didn't know how that could happen. It's probably because the people do nothing.
That's what at the bottom of the antelope statue, that's what it says. That's all that's required. It's for good people to do nothing. And in fact, good people did something, and that's why it was ended. Well, thank you very much. Oh, Bill.
I just have a quick comment. You talked about the poisoning
Yes.
and how that impacted the community. I found it really surprising. I went back to DC for training with the FBI Academy when I was in law enforcement. And one of the biggest cases that they still talk about is one of the first cases of bioterrorism that happened in this country. And they talk about the Rajneesh case.
They do.
Yeah, so it really is a very special and impactful case that happened to this county.
I held off calling it that because for one instance, blankets inoculated with smallpox were knowingly given to Native Americans. And in the second case, I just came across something that suggests that there was, in 1965 in California, a poisoning using Salmonella typhimurium that was traced to the water source, and something like 16,000 people got sick from it, and they couldn't figure out how that could have happened if it hadn't been delivered. So I got to look into that a bit more.
Good point. Thank you for the correction.
You're probably, I don't know if it's a correction or not, it's just more information. Yes.
You talked about that they had blocked you on the county road.
Yes, that stopped us, yeah.
Well, fortunately, it was just prior, probably a year, the very first year we were out there, my dad was very inquisitive. So we drove because we knew that was the county road. And we got to drive right But it was a real experience, And so that must have been after, so they started, what was it,
81.
81.
Yeah.
And you know, the thing that was so unique about all this, too, is that year before, we had election that November, just, they had just gotten started, and the judge, the recorder, and the other people, or the sheriff, was all elected and taken out. And then if we had not had those people, so we had a lot of prayer going on.
I'm talking about somebody coming through, going through. I was looking at some of the Rajneesh, what's it called? Their newspaper. Rajneesh Times. And I read one of the captions, and here Earl Davis from up at Pine Hollow. So he, yeah, I was thinking that something else. But anyway, there he was. He and a bunch of his buddies had decided they'd come down cross country on their three-wheelers, and they were covered with dirt and stuff. But there they were in this photo. I just love that. They came to see what was going on. Oh, it's another question. Yeah.
Julie, you
Yes.
mentioned, I'm Laura Camini,
Yes.
but you mentioned the newspaper articles that came out recently, last year. And it started out with Jim Camini and that Pooja, the nurse, had gone to the hospital to kill him. That's true. But what was wrong about that was that he did not have IDs, and that they had allowed me to take him out of the hospital. I had taken him out a half an hour before Pooja showed up to give him this shot. And so that part and that person that wrote that did not call me, but he called me later and said he'd contact me again so we can make that correction, but I've never heard from him.
Thank you. And then you and I will be doing an interview. Looking forward to that.
So,
One more question, maybe, I think.
Just a comment, there were a series of town hall meetings, I
Yes.
think now too, and at which time you could view these personalities at work. So do you have copies of those?
No, I don't. Of the meeting, of the town hall minutes of the meetings?
No.
Video.
Television, town hall, channel 2.
Oh, no, I don't. Do you have copies of it?
No, I
I'd love
don't.
to see them.
Yeah, but I'm sure you could get copies.
I wonder. Lots of times they just, record it. So, but that would be really nice. Jack Souse was the narrator.
I remember how nasty Sheila was during that time, and how great Margaret Hill was.
I have a great deal of
I think they want to.
Okay, all right, thank you very much.